Good morning, WestWay.
Good morning.
Tuesday, Q, well, non-Q, actually, not the Q. It's not an A because we didn't get any questions. We didn't have, so we'll have some answers.
Tuesday chat time.
Tuesday chat time. Yeah. So you've done some traveling over the last week.
Yeah.
Went to go see family in both cases. You wanna chat a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, we went to Casper, and visited my in-laws and a cousin of mine that we got to see. There's a waterfall just south of town that we went out to and hiked around there a little bit. That was fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's early enough that it wasn't really crowded or anything, so that was fun. And then we got back from there, and then we turned around and went out to Omaha to help Emily move from the on-campus housing that she was in to a house down in Omaha.
So I wonder, like, the whole Nebraska Christian thing kind of happened 6 weeks ago, maybe? 8 weeks ago?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure when it was that they announced that the school will be closing. So she had, it was probably 6 or 8 weeks. They had to finish out the semester, and then she found a house that she could rent with a few other girls that she could get into the 1st of June. So, which, it's June.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it still feels like March.
So she was able to stay on campus for a few weeks after that until she was able to move. So it worked out all right.
So when are things officially done at Nebraska Christian? Like, so I know whatever, classes are finalized and all that kind of stuff. Like, what is that? I don't know. What is that? Maybe you know or you don't know. But what does that look like as far as things officially being done at Nebraska Christian? And
last week was the last week with the office staff in their offices, as far as I know. I know a couple of them commented things on social media last week about being a weird feeling being in there for the last week and clearing out all their stuff. So yeah, last week is the short answer to that question.
Was there anyone from the Nebraska campus that is moving to California? Are they keeping anyone like employed from True Hope?
I'm not sure. I think there were a couple that there was. Yeah, I don't know. I know there were a couple that probably could have made that move, but I'm not sure if they've decided to do that yet or if they will. Yeah, I don't really have any solid information on that. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, you sent me that couple pictures from campus.
The campus. The whole time we're out there, and it's just this empty campus, I just kept thinking, what a great place for a college. And yeah, it was difficult. I think I've said before, maybe it was with you, maybe it was on one of these videos, I'm Gen X and we're supposed to be disloyal to institutions, but Nebraska Christian College has been one for me that I love. The college, and it was really tough to be out there and it's empty, and even in the midst of what's going on in the world right now, in our country right now, knowing we have the answer. And we've got to find ways to communicate Christ and to be his hands and feet in a world that's falling apart without him. Yeah.
Are you, I know we've talked about this topic before, but are you a Bible Project listener? I mean, what's your interaction level with Bible Project?
I have listened to several of the studies on some of the different books, and I haven't listened to their podcast like all the way through all of them or anything like that, but I really like them, what I've watched and what I've heard from them. And I think you get a magazine from them, don't you? Yeah, I thumbed through that once when I was at your house. And really seems like really solid, good content. But yeah, I haven't followed it really closely. I almost said really religiously, but that sounded funny.
Yeah, it's for me. So I'm going to make a connection in a second. I am going somewhere with this. For me, listening to their content, I rarely listen to it in a timely way. So like right now they're finishing a series on apocalyptic literature in the Old Testament. So we tend to think of like Daniel, and then the Book of Revelation. I think they're at the tail end of this 4 or 5 week series on apocalyptic literature, and my MO with Bible Project is when they get most of the way through a podcast series, that's when I start to listen, and I don't know why.
Because you can binge it that way.
Yeah. That actually probably is why. So I just started listening to that, and what they were talking in the second part of this podcast series, they've been talking about dreams in the Bible.
Okay.
And toward the end of this particular podcast in the series, they're talking about how God uses dreams to uncover like what's really happening in the world. And like I think, like you said, as Christians we have the answer to what's going on, and just processing that, and then processing what I listened to on the podcast today. I think as it's what's being exposed are the realities of the sinfulness of mankind right now. And so if you listen to this podcast, what you'll find out is the word apocalypse is actually a Greek word, and what it really means is unveiling or revelation, which is why we call the last book of the Bible in English, we call it Revelation. So it's something that's been revealed. So they would argue that what we're seeing right now is an unveiling of maybe the depravity of man, or the wickedness of man, or the sinfulness of man.
Yeah, we are putting our depravity on full display in so many ways, and it's ugly. It's not anything that anybody wants to watch. And too many times we try to answer that depravity with more depravity.
Yeah.
I mean, when we answer violence with violence, we bring about more violence. And we have an answer in Christ that is very different than the answers that the world is positing right now. We're called to love, not just the people that are like us. We're called not just to love people that are different than us or have different opinions. We are called to love even our enemies. There is no difference that I have with any person that excuses me from loving them. No difference of opinion. There's no rights that I have or that someone else has that excuse me from loving my neighbor, loving my enemy. Those are things that God has called us to do, and they're not optional. They become, if we allow Christ to shape us, they become part of our character. They become the natural outpouring of us living our lives. And I think right now we see a lot of people, and I want to be careful too, because there are a lot of examples of that happening right now.
Yeah.
but the media doesn't talk about those as much because they're not as exciting or thrilling or ad selling. I don't know. And so we see the headlines of more and more violence that's done in response to someone else's violence. And we need to be careful where we place our focus, because there is that, but there also are very great examples of people taking loving action in response to violence that's happening and in response to the injustice that's happening. We need to look for those stories and live out those stories. And maybe some of us need to write about those stories and tell about those stories and share those stories. We can blame the media for doing what they do, but we need to share the good news that we see happening in the world.
So this week we finished 2 Timothy. We read through chapter 4 and we talked about chapter 4. Paul's charge to Timothy was to preach the word, be prepared, patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage. No one's going to listen, which always thrills me. But you should keep a clear mind in every situation. Don't be afraid of suffering. Work at telling others good news, fully care. Like all of these things. So as Christians, like everything I wholeheartedly agree with. Like the way we interact, like that really matters. I'm curious for your thoughts. What do you see? What's the role of pastors in this time? Like how do we like deal with these realities? Like what's our role in the midst of observing, seeing all of these things taking place? How do you, I'm just curious, like what's your, I don't know, philosophy / theology on dealing with real world events?
I would say somewhat that depends on context. Right now, I feel like as a pastor, I'm in a position where I need to listen more than I need to say anything.
Is that easy for you?
Sometimes. I mean, it's easy for me to listen. It's not as easy for me to not do something, because I want to do something. I want to take action, but we live in a pretty white place, and we have the racial divides that we have in our community are not the same racial divides that are on the national spotlight right now. And I think because of that, I hesitate to insert my opinions. And maybe I don't need to. Maybe the differences aren't as much as I feel like they are in my mind. But I just I was in Omaha this last weekend, and I have really good friends that are pastors out there, other pastors that I've met and just have a acquaintance with, I guess, that have really been on my heart, on my mind. I've been praying for them. White pastor, black pastor, and I'm just thinking about my responsibility right now is very different than theirs. I think in their cases, I know some of the statements that I've heard from them in the last few days have been kind of like what I said, we need to listen. But also there have been, we need to calm, we need to think about the actions that we're taking. And so some pastors have taken that, like, I want to be a calming influence over my people who are angry and just want to do something. I think when we're angry and we want to do something, it's very easy for us to get caught up into actions that if we could slow down and think, would not be the actions that we would take, because they're not going to lead to the results that we actually want. And so I think some pastors are taking that approach. I think for me, like I said, my job right now is to listen. My job right now is to help the next generation discover better ways to interact than maybe what some previous generations have. Better ways to find resolutions to their problems. And maybe that's leaning on me too. Like I'm a problem solver, and so I can gather all the information, and then let's help assimilate a plan for putting all this information together and working to solve the problem.
Do you think that, so I'm going to ask this question and I'm going to give an example of it. So Lori Smith has asked a question. How do we deal with all the anguish and pain going on in the world? I want to do something, but I don't know what to do but pray. So don't talk about that second sentence yet. So obviously, I mean, we have people within our church body that are looking to someone for an answer or for a response, or like they're looking for, I don't know, information. Like John and I had this conversation the other day. Like, at what point you use the phrase inserting myself. So inserting myself into this, like, is this helpful? Is it not helpful? Like, how, again, I'm just, for curiosity's sake, like philosophy, theology, and all of this, you know, so I've sort of made the decision today, in fact, in response to what I talked about in my Psalm reading. Like, I think I'm just going to stay off Twitter for a little while.
That's a good first step, probably.
Well, and I think because I think what I'm seeing and what I've seen is something I'm sure complained about on here before. Like, we have a whole bunch of people telling us what we should be saying and should be doing.
Yeah.
And so navigating that space, and this is the tie into what we talked about on Sunday in 2 Timothy 4, keeping a clear head, don't be, like, doing all of these things. But is there more to it? Like, by my silence, by your silence, in not talking about these things, I know we are saying something. What, like, how do we decide? Like, what does that look like? What's your...
Yeah. I guess I would say whatever silence I may go into probably needs to be temporary, because we need to speak for those that can't speak for themselves, or those who are speaking for themselves and not being heard. But before we do that, I think we owe it to them to get the message clear. What is it, like, specifically right now, what is it in our Black community that they are trying to say? And how can we help? Like, if we have a platform, if we have a voice that's being heard, how can we convey their message? And this is where I think, as a pastor, we need to be careful, because my job is not to convey someone else's message to my constituency. My job is to convey, like Paul told Timothy, preach the gospel. The truth of this situation that we're in right now is that people's hearts need to change. The only way that really happens is when we allow Christ to begin to work in our lives and allow his word to shape our hearts. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, Paul said in Romans, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. When we allow God to renew us, God brings us into a relationship with people that are not like us. And whether that's black, white, male, female, whatever differences we divide it over, those are not differences that God would like us to divide over. And what needs to change in our society right now, in our culture, specifically regarding race, is only changeable, I think, by the transformation that Christ does. And that's why we focus on the gospel.
Yeah. And what's like, again, reading through these instructions, what's interesting is, like, people aren't going to listen to that.
No, they're not. They don't want to hear that. I don't want to be changed. I just want everybody else to change around me. So, and I've been reading through some of Jeremiah and through a book by Eugene Peterson about the book of Jeremiah and his prophecies. And I remember early on in youth ministry, somebody said they were teaching a class about Jeremiah, and they said this is the youth minister's prophet, because here God gives him a message. He says, go preach to the people, and they're not going to listen to you. Mm-hmm. And that's youth ministry.
Well, that's all ministry.
Right.
not limited to youth ministry. That's all ministry.
Yeah. Itching ears want to hear easy solutions, maybe. Solutions that place them in the right already. Itching ears don't want to hear there's something about me that is broken and in need of repair. And that's the gospel.
Yeah.
Is that every one of us is broken beyond our capacity to repair ourselves. We have scarred the image of God within us. And the only way for that to be restored is to allow Christ to do that work.
And this can be really frustrating in a world of, I think that the phrase is in the world of whataboutism. Because we all want to deal with, like, everyone else's stuff, and this is what you're talking about. And when I read the Psalm this morning, like, I was really feeling confronted by the things that I'm searching for and the things that I'm trying to find satisfaction in are really only going to be found in God. And it's easy to, like, ultimately that is about self-justification. Like, I want to find justification I want to find self-justification. And then I thought of the scene where the guy asks Jesus, what good thing do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Mm-hmm. And blah, blah, there's that kind of scene rolls through, and Jesus lands on basically the horizontal commandments about how you are with one another.
Yeah.
And the guy says, I've done all of these, and I love the text. So I don't know what the NLT says. I'm sure the NIV, because that's like what I just had. So as much as I use the NLT, I have the NIV stamped in my brain. Uh-huh. I'm sure it says something like, and the man wanting to justify himself.
Yeah.
Like, I am just, one of the things that I'm overwhelmed with today is my desire to justify myself. And so how do we, like, this sounds maddening. What you are describing to me. If I were flipping through Facebook Live and I saw this video, and I were to listen to this back and forth, like, this sounds maddening. This sounds ridiculous. It sounds like there's never going to be any kind of fix. So why, like, so then, great, we're going to proclaim the gospel to people who aren't going to listen. How is that a solution? Because now we're to Lori's question. So then what's the I know the Jesus answer.
Yeah.
And that is the answer. But what's the plan to deal with the anguish and the pain going on in the world? Like, what's...
Yeah, I think the good side of the question is that some will listen and some will allow Christ to shape us and change us. In the meantime, my responsibility is to bring peace where I can bring peace, to bring justice where I can bring justice. Although I think we need to be careful with the word justice. I don't actually want justice for myself because I know what I actually deserve. And it's not good. But we need to bring hope where we can bring hope. And for a lot of us in settings where we are pretty homogenous, we need to get out of our bubble a little bit more, or a lot more, and interact with people that are different from us. I know here in Scottsbluff we have a population base that is a lot more multi-ethnic than we might realize if we surround ourselves in a bubble of, like for you and I, whiteness. We can all divide into our separate neighborhoods and stay out of each other's way, but that doesn't bring hope to any of us. It actually robs us of some of the beauty of what it means to be made in God's image. Every culture, every people group is made in God's image. And I think we miss some of that when we divide ourselves by age and race, and so I would say get out and interact with people that are different than you. And I know with some of the restrictions that there are right now, maybe that just means go sit down at a park bench and talk with somebody. But things are opening up. You can go out to dinner. You can go out to lunch, go grab a coffee. Go stand in the front yard and talk to people. Go for a walk and talk to people in your neighborhood or in the next neighborhood over where you might walk. Go walk the path and see who else is out there. There will be people like you, and there will be people very different than you. We need to interact with the full scope of humanity that is in our vicinity, maybe in our area of interaction, and don't avoid those that are different. Get to know them and find out how you can love them.
And again, I think, I think this sounds very minimalistic. Like, I'm gonna say it and then I'm gonna flip over what I just said. This sounds very minimalistic to us because we wonder what's the use. But I'll counter with this. I think, so I've shared part of our story a number of times when we came to Christ. The person that was going to watch our kids in Marysville, Ohio, invited us into relationship and invited us to join her at church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then she waited outside every Sunday for my wife to get there with her kids. See, that sounds very minimalistic.
Yeah.
That sounds like that would never work. What difference is that going to make by inviting one person? Like, all of those things. Like, that sounds like it's not going to work. But that person doing that thing put our entire life, our family's trajectory was completely changed through the obedience of one person.
Yeah, and not just your family. My family, the families of WestWay that are now following your lead, they were affected by a babysitter saying, You guys want to come to church with me? And then waiting for you. We don't know what God is going to do with our little actions. All we know is that he's called us to do them.
Yeah.
Love our neighbor.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Jesus feeding the 5,000 people, telling his disciples, hey, go give these people some food. They're hungry. They've been here a long time. We don't have any food to give them. What are we going to do? And so the disciples start collecting, and all they come up with is one kid's lunch. And Jesus takes what that one little kid offered, and he feeds thousands of people. Your small, whatever you can do that feels like this isn't a big deal. And it's for you, it's not a big deal. It's not a big sacrifice maybe to offer up your lunch. But it puts you in a position to see a miracle like what that kid saw and see what God can do. And we may never see all the impact of the small actions that we take. But we aren't called to see the end result. We're called to take the actions. And so, faithfully loving the new family that moves into town that needs a babysitter ends up changing the course of people's lives. And you can be a part of that in your neighbors' lives. But it starts with those small things. Mm-hmm. And I know, we can talk right now about the systematic problems, and there are systematic problems in our culture that need solved. Most of us don't have a position of any kind of authority that's going to allow us to redevelop the systems of government and our socioeconomic systems. We're not going to be a part of that on an architectural side, but we can be a part of that on the ground level. Every systemic change begins and ends with personal changes, and systemic solutions to the problems that we're facing, I think they start with us loving our neighbor that's not like us.
Yeah. And now we're
and I know that's oversimplistic.
Well, yeah.
But it really, that's where it starts. And I think we start there and see where it goes.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is so much of these conversations, whether it's here on a Q&A or on a Sunday morning for the 10:15 or on our small group conversations, it seems like it constantly just circles back to these core, simple, ridiculous things that as pastors, we constantly talk about and make simple. And the real answer, the answer to Lori's question, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do but pray. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And there is nothing minimalistic or unimportant about either one of those two things. Because for, like you said, for me to think that something that I'm going to put on Facebook is going to change the world. This was John and Mai's conversation the other day. For us to think that we're going to overturn systems and structures, I don't think that's going to happen. And, the Bible says that our enemy is not of this world. Our enemy is principalities and darkness and all of these things that we can't fight. Well, we can fight if we follow God's instructions, which is loving other people, which is loving God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. So I would encourage you, Lori, in asking that question, to love your neighbor. And that's not a small thing. It's not a glib pastoral comment that just says, oh, if everybody just loves their neighbors, I'd like to buy the world a Coke and everything will be great. we're called to love our neighbors. And that doesn't mean that I can't wish that there were systemic evils overturned.
And take action to overturn them when those actions are presented to us.
Right.
But the underlying reality that we live in is that most of us don't have near as much access to systemic change capability as we have to interpersonal change capability.
Yeah.
Every single one of us can love our neighbor. Every single one of us can reach out to somebody who's different than us and love them in real and practical ways. We can hurt for the hurting, and we can speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves or who are being marginalized and not heard. There is a critical mass that can be reached. This week was Pentecost on Sunday, and I just think of the change that has been brought about by what was born on that Pentecost day almost 2,000 years ago when the church began. When the church began, the church was not a bunch of rich white people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the church is still not a bunch of rich white people.
Right.
But sometimes we put it in that frame in our mindset and we forget where the church started. It was a bunch of nobodies in an occupied nation who had the Roman Empire stacked against them, who had the Jewish culture and law stacked against them. All of the authorities surrounding the church were out to shut them down from the very beginning. And yet, here we are, almost 2,000 years later, and we still have the mandate from Christ to establish his kingdom. And that means his values. The Roman Empire didn't value human life the way that God called us to. And so the church changed the culture.
And they changed the culture by telling them about Jesus, who changed them, who changed people.
Yeah, I mean, practices like exposure. If you, let's say your family has a child that you don't want, just leave them outside and let them die. That's a cultural practice that they participated in. Until the church said, wait, those people are valuable. And the church began to take them into their own homes. Mm-hmm. There were sicknesses that you had to go live outside the community if you have this. And the church said, those people are still valuable. We can't just throw them away and make them live in the dump. And the church began to take them into their own homes and establish places where they could be cared for and just shown a basic level of human dignity. And so a lot of the things that we just take for granted were born out of cultural changes that the church brought about. And I would say, Lori, keep praying and keep looking for ways to love your neighbor for the rest of the church. As we collectively do that, I think we see change happening. In places where the church is doing that, we see change happening. We see hope. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we just want to encourage you to be faithful to what God has called you to. And for me to be faithful to what God has called me to. And for me to recognize and for you to recognize, like, what are all of the ways that that we seek to justify ourselves, that we maybe are cowed into submission, into thinking that we can't make changes. And these are not, they're little things, but they're not little things. And I mean, looking through the list of people, I don't know who's still watching, but one of the people that was on early today is someone who's a teacher who has a tremendous ability to impact people for Christ. And she doesn't, I want to say this cautiously because we talked a little bit about this on Sunday, she doesn't necessarily have to talk about Jesus or use his name in order to make that happen. We say this all the time here. How we are together is a proclamation of the gospel. The way we interact with other people matters. The way we love them.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the way that we interact with people shows the level of change that God has brought about in our own life. We can tend to be self-focused, all of us. And so when I put myself to the side in order to care for someone else, in sort of an act of rebellion against myself, in order to serve someone, that's because of the change that God has done in my life. It's not because I decided I'm going to be a good guy today, and it's because of the change that Christ has brought about. It's because of the way that Christ has shaped, and we see that happening over and over and over. And whether anybody else focuses on that or not, we should still keep doing it.
Yeah, and that speaks right to 2 Timothy 4.
Yeah.
Timothy, do these things. No one's going to listen to you. Do them anyway.
I think of on Friday, you guys did the Convoy of Hope.
Yeah.
And passed out like 800 some boxes of food. And whether anybody ever noticed that or not, I know there were articles, there were interviews, and it was awesome to see that stuff. Whether anybody ever did any of those or not, whether anybody saw it happened, and those 800 families that got food have to wonder why. Mm-hmm. Why would someone do that? Why would someone care? Well, there's a reason.
So let me give you a little backstory on that. So usually when an organization does something like Convoy of Hope, the organization itself raises the money for the food. So let me see if I can find this because I want to make sure I get my data right. So usually the organization itself has to raise the money for the food. So for instance, when we've done the food pack in the past, we had to raise $10,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I got this message from Tyson over at The Rock on Sunday morning. Sent this at 7:53. Found out today why the Convoy of Hope truck was free. A widow paid $23,000 for the produce and the delivery.
Yeah.
That's why.
Why would she do that?
Why would she do that? Because Jesus has changed her life, and she wants to serve and love and proclaim that same message to people that she will never, ever, ever meet.
Yeah. And you might not have $23,000 to give away. A lot of us don't.
I do not.
But we probably all have a little bit. We probably all have a few loaves and a couple fish that we can give away.
Yeah.
We're not called to give away $23,000 and buy truckloads of food for other people. We're called to give what we can and to be faithful with what we have and what we are. And for all of us, that's going to look a little bit different. But we're called to that, and God loves to see that.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that God uses. When we're faithful with the little that we have, God makes a lot more out of it than we could ever imagine.
Right. So, and actually, that's a good trade trend. Speaking of transitions, we're going to be talking about this coming Sunday for the month of June. We're talking about transitions. We're talking about how do we love God well in the midst of transitions? How do we love God well when things like are rough? How are we faithful to what God's call is in our lives? And it just seems like, I don't know, this theme sounds very familiar to probably every other theme over the last 3 years. Like how do we transition? How do we love people? And how do we love God amidst life? And we're going to be talking about, there's a pretty major theme, pretty major story arc in the Old Testament where God's people, after hundreds and hundreds of years of disobedience, are carried off to Babylon. So we're going to be talking about that theme. You mentioned Jeremiah, actually preaching on Jeremiah, part of Jeremiah this week. So Jeremiah is this week, and then Daniel is the 14th. Esther is the 21st, and then on the 28th, as long as my Sundays are right. You should look at a calendar. And then on the last Sunday in June, we're talking about Ezra and Nehemiah. So what does it look like to go from Jerusalem to Babylon and then home again? And how do we do that? And how are we faithful to God in the midst of that? We also want to let you know that we talked about this on Sunday. We want to let you know that it was our desire to be live this coming Sunday on June 7th. That was part of our regathering plan. And I say desire because that's what it was. And our reality is this week again, we're going to be hosting a watch party of our 10:15 content. We are really excited about lots of things that are happening at WestWay Christian Church. And one of those things that we are really excited about, because we've been doing online content beyond the Q&A, because we've been posting our 10:15, our sermon, and our music, and all of those kind of things. We've had so many people interact with us through that do not come to WestWay Christian Church. People who will probably never, ever, ever walk in the door of our building, but there are people in Scottsbluff and Gearing and our surrounding area who are hearing what God is saying to them through WestWay Christian Church, and we want that to continue. And the pathway for that to continue is for us to we're going to live stream. So the same thing that people are seeing on Sunday morning live here in the building, they're going to be able to see at home at 10:15. And we are about this close I want to make sure, so it doesn't get lost in my skin. We are about this close to making that happen. And that's through the hard work of people who are just serving in their giftedness. Yeah. So we are this close to making that happen. Our desire is to do that on June 14th. So we have watch party one more week, and it's been good. It's been fun to gather with people who are ready to be here and sing. We've had really good conversation after the 10:15 together in the room. That's probably been my favorite part of the regathering, is being able to discuss what we're doing and discuss the message and what it means for people. So that's been a lot of fun. So again, we just want to let you know, we don't want to keep anything from anybody. So we have one more week of watch party, and I would just encourage you, if you're ready to come back, we want you here to see what's going on. And so that's we just wanted to start communicating that right now, and then hopefully June 14th will be ready to move to our next phase of regathering and what it looks like for us to proclaim Jesus as Lord, just in a different way. So I'm excited about that. Anything to add? Anything to close? Any closing thoughts?
I don't think I have any closing thoughts.
Okay.
Just be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have.
Yeah.
When people ask the question, why are you that way?
Mm-hmm.
And they're only going to ask that question if you live a life that looks different than the culture around us. Right now is a great time to do that. There's a lot of darkness that's put on display, which really is an invitation for us to put the light on display. And I know that sounds cliche and cheesy, and I guess that's who I am.
That's all we got. Like we talked about that 2 Christmas Eves ago. We have one message.
Yep.
When the crippled man asked Peter and John in Acts 2, he asked them for money, and he says, I have no silver or gold, but what I do have I'll give you. Get up and walk, and let me tell you about Jesus.
Yeah. He is what the world needs right now.
Right.
And he is exactly what we have to give the world right now.
Yep. So thanks for watching. We love you guys, and we will see you soon. So have a great rest of your day.
Bye.